So this is the video of the lecture number 3 for the Nack Network for Nanotechnology Workforce Education section on materials overview for nanotechnology. And lecture number 3 is about inorganic and organic materials, classifying materials by whether they're inorganic or organic. So organic materials are substances that contain carbon. And for nanoscience the exception of these, well, actually the exception to these are include graphite, graphene, diamond, silicon carbide, and etc. Other than those few or examples, most carbon containing substances are considered organic molecules. So organics include small molecules, polymers, and giant molecules. Inorganic materials do not contain carbon. If they don't have carbon, they're for sure inorganic materials. And if they do contain carbon, there's a few exceptions. Carbon dioxide, by the way, is also usually considered inorganic, not organic. Anyways, I'll have a good feel for what are inorganic substances, that is, does not contain carbon. So we'll concentrate on organic substances in this slide deck. Carbon-based molecules and materials may contain any number of other elements besides carbon, including hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, halogens, as well as phosphorus, silicon, and sulfur. And if you look at the slide deck and hover, I believe each of these are hyperlinked to a Wikipedia page that tells you a little bit more about each of them. The bonding possibilities available to carbon make organics unique. So because carbon has 4 valence electrons, it can react and form huge different numbers of different molecules. So example of carbon using these sp3, sp2, they're just different ways to describe the geometry that a atom reacts and holds with other atoms. So methane, as you guys know, is CH4. So this is an example of methane. Here in the middle, you have C and then H, 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 H. It's called a tetrahedral. And if you looked at it, it would look like this, where you have the dark carbon atom in the middle and then 4 balls equally spaced out in 3 dimensions all around it. And by the way, the angles for tetrahedral are 109.5 degrees in every way. And the reason that the atom comes like this is that each hydrogen atom, which has electrons around it, wants to be as far away from the other ones, all of the other ones, as possible. So this configuration, this geometry here, give the hydrogen atoms as far away from each other as possible around the carbon atom. So with 4 valence electrons, that carbon atom can bond with 4 different hydrogen atoms, and this is the way they structure themselves. Another structure that we've talked about is sp2, and that's graphene, and that would be like a 2-dimensional formation, where the other one you could clearly see was in 3 dimensions. Graphene is 2 dimensions, and each carbon center atom is attached to 3 other ones. So if I use, let me quickly see if I can annotate this. If I use like this carbon atom as my middle one, right? It's attached to 3 other ones. This one here, this one here, and this one here, right? And that's a 3-dimensional format. Okay, so that's sp2. And you also notice it's in a ring type of shape. Okay. Things like ethane, ethene, ethine, all those can be in a long, so this is only 2 carbon atoms, but you can keep adding atoms, carbon atoms to these, and the white ones are hydrogen. You can make this as long or short as you want. And this again is an sp3. So in general, just summarizing, right? You can make all kinds of different shapes and lengths. Like this ethane could be really long or really short. Ethene can also be long or short. There's just so many ways you can, and then you can add oxygens to them, or besides just hydrogen, you can add all kinds of different other elements to these rings to make a whole bunch of different molecules. Here's some that are in kind of a ring structure like graphene is, but these don't necessarily have to be flat. Some of them are kind of like weird bendy shapes, and you could have bunches of rings hooked together. You guys have seen, if you took for bio, you guys have seen, with proteins and carbohydrates. Those are all made out of mostly carbon, a lot carbon, and you can see the different shapes that they can create, right? So we have polymers now. Polymers are carbon-based, and they are large molecules made up of smaller repeat units covalently bonded together. Sometimes plastics or macromolecules. So, in synthetics, you have plastics, and in biology, you have certain macromolecules, and they're all over the place, obviously. So super long strings of these. These are some of the synthetic polymers that you might have. You're all familiar with them. You can actually look at a polymer. I thought this was cool using an atomic force microscope. We had a little lesson on AFM before. So this is a polymer chain as recorded using an atomic force microscope. So the polymer is about 200 nanometers long, and the thickness is 0.4 nanometers, so long and thin. And the other reason that polymers are important for nanotechnology is because you can embed different materials, nanomaterials or nanoparticles into polymers. And I think that the silver nanoparticle is embedded here to impart antimicrobial properties to whatever this polymer is. I'm not sure about the clay, maybe moisture trapping or something like that. Okay, so those are all different types of organic materials. Now some inorganic polymers. So I used to work at GE Silicones, which is now called Momentive, and we would make silicon-based polymers, right? And so your baking pans that are like rubbery, those are silicon, because one of the good things about silicon versus carbon-based polymers is that they have a much wider temperature range. But the same idea goes for silicon-based polymers as they do carbon-based polymers, in that, you have silicon, 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 and super long chains. This one here is an example of 1 unit for a polydimethyl siloxane. So you get this and repeat this unit over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and then you get a silicone polymer. Well, why am I talking about these in a nanotechnology class? So some organic small molecules and some polymers behave as semiconductors. So someone was given the Nobel Prize in chemistry for the discovery and development of conductive polymers. Usually these organic semiconductors are aromatic molecules having extended, oh, you don't need to know this, pi electron systems, but pretty cool. Some organic semiconductors are here. So, wow, look at that. Complicated structures. So pretty cool. This one, you see there's a copper atom in the center of these nitrogen rings, which are connected to a bunch of carbon rings. So when you look at these molecular structures, anywhere there's no letter, that's a carbon atom at every corner that there's no letter. If it's not a carbon atom, they have to put the letter or the chemical symbol in there. So nitrogen, carbon, nitrogen, carbon, nitrogen, carbon, so on and so forth. So very cool. Anyway, here's some organic semiconductors that were created. Small molecule and polymer organic semiconductors have many uses, like OLEDs. I think that's organic light emitting diodes for displays and TVs. Flexible electronics, super cool, right? You've seen them on commercials and stuff like that. Not readily available as far as I know yet. Solar cells and sensors. Sensors probably right now are the most common use of them. So here's an example of an OLED TV. Some other complicated organics. Okay, we've touched on some of these too, and this gets not super into it, but a little bit more another look at giant molecules. So things called dendrimers. The term originates from the Greek word dendron, which means tree. They're inherently 3D nanoparticles, so they have 3 dimensions as opposed to like graphene, which is really only 2 dimensions, really. The size and molecular mass of dendrimers can be specifically controlled during synthesis. That's important. We have the capabilities to do that now. This is very different from the classical polymerization process, which results in linear polymers, which are usually random in sizes. Here's an example of a dendrimer, right? Where I'm not exactly sure what this specific thing is, but you could see that they have a different material contained in the center of this very large molecule. So some applications of dendrimers: contrast agents for MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging, delivery of drugs. We've talked about this before, and other therapeutic agents. So the drug molecules can be loaded both in the interior of the dendrimer as well as attached to the surface groups. So in this case, this might be the drug material. And maybe this drug is insoluble in water, right? So it cannot pass like through your body to get to where it needs to go. So if you encapsulate it in a dendrimer and somehow you put different functionalities on the outside of this dendrimer to make it want to go right to where the tumor is, you could get the drug right to the tumor. Oopsies. Vectors and gene therapy. So vectors transfer genes through the cell membrane into the nucleus. Currently, liposomes and genetically engineered viruses have been mainly used for this. So some applications of these dendrimers. And the key thing while we're talking about this in nanotechnology is because now they're actually creating it on purpose, right? And specifically. So some of nature's giant molecules, these are not ones that people have been able to create, but a virus. Here's virus. I'm not familiar with that one. Pretty huge. Here's a rhinovirus. I think that's the cold virus. And HIV virus. So interesting. All right. So that would be the end of this section on inorganic and organic materials.